So, the role of leadership staff, who are they and what's their role in the lawmaking process? Now, there are four main legislative leaders that represent the two political parties in the two houses of the California legislature, the Assembly and Senate. These four individuals are, of course, elected by members of their respective caucuses, and the positions of Speaker of the Assembly and Senate President pro tem of the Senate are confirmed by a majority of their respective houses after nomination by their caucus members. And then the two minority or Republican leaders are selected. They're elected by their respective caucus members rather than the entire legislative house in the Assembly or Senate. So staff for these four legislative leaders play a very critical role in the California legislative process when legislators are considering and voting upon thousands of bills and amendments, as well as the state budget, budget bills junior, and numerous budget trailer bills. And these staff help ensure that that legislative process goes relatively smoothly. Now, these staff members in leadership, like their bosses, have to obviously balance a number of competing interests, all while trying to keep their respective caucus members happy. Many have described it as akin to the proverbial herding of cats. Now, there's obviously tremendous political power over the legislative process in the two House leaders, the Assembly Speaker and the Senate President pro tem. And that obviously requires tremendous work and sacrifice for those offices to function at a high level throughout the tenure of the individual legislative leaders. Sometimes when those leaders are termed out, so too do their senior staff depart. Usually the legislature itself, but sometimes just the leadership office. There are a few exceptions, naturally, but it is a tremendous grind for both the elected officials and their staff. So, of course, many of us hope that key leadership staff remain not only during the tenure of their bosses, but also with future leaders as well. You know, in order for the two houses of the California legislature to operate properly and efficiently, there's tremendous reliance on the leadership teams and all of the professional staff members that comprise the leadership staff amongst the four leaders. They not only have to obviously serve their legislative leaders, but they serve the entire House and, of course, ultimately the people of the state of California. Not an easy job by any means. And although it's quite difficult at times, these professional staff members can also wield enormous influence over both the development and the implementation of state public policy. In the office of the leaders, the two leaders in the Assembly and the two leaders in the Senate, there are both personal and leadership staff members. Now, the personal staff are those who work for the individual legislator, perhaps on their bills and constituent work. And then the leadership staff, who not just are answerable to the leader, but also for the broader party caucus, Democrat or Republican. And so the two leaders in the Assembly and Senate, the Speaker and pro tem, as you might imagine, have a very large policy staff who are assigned to a number of policy committees to, keep tabs on them and assist where appropriate and monitor the activities of the 33 standing committees in the Assembly and the 22 standing committees in the state Senate. These staff are often involved in a lot of the major bills and discussions as measures make their way through the legislative process. And of course, their job is also to ensure that caucus priorities are being pursued and attained, and they need to apprise at appropriate times their House leader regarding, for example, problematic issues or measures that might be having a hard time through the legislative process. So these leadership staff are often involved in some of the the biggest pieces of legislation and the most important policy that's going through the two houses of the California State Legislature. At the end of session, the leadership staff also end up, working to ensure that the caucus members' bills are being dutifully considered by the other house, the ABs in the Senate and the SBs in the Assembly, and naturally bringing to light any potential problems or bills that are having some struggles in the other house, for example. And so these leadership staff deal with all the members of their respective caucuses and the staff members to those members, and of course, keeping a close contact with the policy committee staff and all of that. Now, some of these leadership staff have been committee consultants, or maybe they worked for several legislators in the past. They often have expertise in multiple subject areas, obviously tremendous political acumen, as they're often at the forefront of both policy and politics. I think the leadership staff have a clear understanding of not only policy matters and the implications of pending measures, but also are attuned to the political and district needs and concerns of individual caucus members. And they certainly are well aware of interest groups and those who are lobbying for and against different measures. These policy consultants in general report to policy directors for the four legislative leaders. And then there's also the Assembly and Senate floor analyses units that have to ensure not only the correct, but the timely analyses being on the floors for the senators and assembly members. And there's also the budget directors who work with, of course, the respective budget committee consultants, the staff director in the Senate and the chief consultant in the Assembly. But the leadership budget directors for the four legislative leaders are overseeing their consultants, but also trying to ensure that the individual caucus priorities are getting reflected in the budget bill, the budget bills junior, and of course the numerous budget trailer bills that have to go through the process as well. These budget directors really know the ins and the outs of the state budget and the process itself. Many have served on the budget committee staff for a while, and certainly the current ones have been able to negotiate a number of budgets with working with the governor's office and the Department of Finance, and of course the legislature's advisor as well. So the legislative leaders will also generally have a press secretary or someone who's charged with communications, primarily to serve as a liaison with the Capitol Press Corps and ensure, best media coverage as possible for those parties. And those folks might have been journalists or communications specialists in the past. They might have worked for individual legislators or on campaign press operations, and obviously appreciate the role that the media plays in the California legislative process. There's also in the Assembly, SOMES, the Speaker's Office of Majority Services, that helps the majority caucus members provide services on non-policy issues such as constituent outreach and mail. There's also the Assembly and Senate Offices of Research, like SOR is a bipartisan office that serves the research needs of California state senators and their staff. They track emerging state and federal issues, and they also help prepare background information for gubernatorial appointees that need to be confirmed by the California Senate Committee on Rules. So you can see or hear that there's a very broad role and a number of folks who play important roles in the leadership staff of the four leaders of the two in the Assembly and two in the Senate, and how they are involved in the California lawmaking process.